Now, this is not the mark. This is the mark of a sort of mafia family. It's not the mark of what you expect the royal family to behave. Yes, I mean, he seems to have needed 3 orgasms a day. He doesn't seem to have had straight sex with people. It's all about oral sex or massages.
So really, what I think you're alleging is the Queen has really quite a dark side to her.
You know, they should be protecting their reputation. And if she really cared about the reputation of the royal family, rather than just making money herself, then she wouldn't be doing this. And one of the claims in the book, in the first 60,000 copies of the book that went out before we were asked to change it, was that Melania actually had a relation, had sex with Epstein before she met Trump.
Breaking the story about Philip would be seen in a way as a direct attack on the Queen, and you just can't do that.
Yep.
She is the national treasure above all national treasures. Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Raj Persaud. I'm a consultant doctor and psychiatrist based in private practice in Harley Street in London in the United Kingdom. I'm delighted to be joined today by Andrew Lownie, who has written a very interesting book, the title of which is Entitled. And this is a book that's all the rage at the moment. Everyone's talking about it. But I want to start, Andrew, by asking you that you're not a journalist, which is what most people would think be the profession of someone who writes a book which is such an expose of recent events. You're a historian. Tell us what that means and the kind of books you've written before.
Well, I'm really a biographer. I mean, I trained as a historian. I mean, I went to Cambridge, did my doctorate in Edinburgh. And my previous books have all been biographies. I mean, have ranged from literary biography, John Buchan, to spy books, Guy Burgess. And this is the third of a trilogy of books on royal marriages. And my feeling was that you're absolutely right. Most people who write about royals write as journalists. Very few historians write. My last 2 books on the Mountbattens and on Edward VIII relied on documents, so that was where I felt comfortable. This is a departure. This is a journalistic book. It's what I call investigative biography. And this relied on interviews almost entirely, and almost impossible to get any records on the royal family or the living royal family. So it is a departure. I mean, I've sort of put my reputation on the line. I mean, what I like about it is it's a way of actually looking at a wider question, which is the monarchy and how it's evolving at the moment, and I suppose royal accountability and transparency, which are issues that interest me, and actually part of a wider question about how our history is being censored. I mean, how so many archives are destroyed or not made available. And I think particularly royal archives are particularly bad in that respect.
I also think it's about an even deeper question, which is about the way Britain runs as a society and the establishment.
Yep.
So I think it's about an even deeper question.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think it's very good that you've seen that, because all my books are about the establishment and the cover-ups.
Right.
So the book on Guy Burgess was about the Cambridge spies, but how the whole story was covered up by the government. Traitor King was the story of Edward VIII as basically a Nazi agent, and how that was covered up. Book on Mountbattens was the whole story of Mountbatten and his paedophilia, and how the establishment shut that story down. So yes, that's exactly what interests me. And I seem a slightly unusual person to do it, because I look like I might be an establishment figure rather than a dangerous radical.
Yes, and you actually talk a bit like an establishment figure, and I mean that with all due respect.
Yeah, no, I am.
You speak very beautifully. But I want to just talk about that a little bit, because it taps into actually something that's very much in the internet, which is conspiracy theories about what's going on at the top echelons of society and what's hidden. In a way, you are kind of almost supporting some of these theories, because you're saying a lot of the people at the very top of society have their snouts in the trough, as it were, and they're not really contributing that much to society, and they're exploiting their position for various nefarious ends. And sex and money are the 2 key things that emerge from the book. That you're arguing that some people at the top of society are kind of like making hay with sex and money. And so it ties into a lot of conspiracy thinking on the internet.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, clearly with Epstein and Trump and all the records, I mean, the timing is good. And I hope everything is sourced as far as you can. I mean, it's always difficult with royal books because people don't want to talk on the record. But I think this is different because there are a lot of people on the record, senior people, senior diplomats and naval figures who are speaking. But I'm always very careful that I don't appear like a conspiracy theorist, that I can sort of support things, or I leave the reader to make up their own mind, having presented the evidence. I may direct the evidence a little bit, but I try not to intrude on the narrative. I like to create a sort of mosaic of impressions, and people then to draw their own conclusions.
But before we talk about the content of the book and some of the astounding allegations you make, I just want to stick with the methodology of a historian, because that's your professional background. And you will be aware, and you must argue with me if I've got this wrong, that when a historian presents an argument, his fellow historians will say, well, there's an alternative interpretation, and did you take into account that evidence? In other words, it seems to me there's a different kind of debate amongst historians about what is the truth than amongst journalists. With all due respect to journalists, if the story is big and takes off, to some extent, I know a lot of journalists are going to be annoyed with me for saying this, that's actually what they really care about. It's clicks on the page.
Yeah.
Whereas historians will have a debate amongst themselves. Is what Andrew's saying actually true? Is it supported by the evidence?
Yep, and I mean, I'm aware of that. I mean, I would say that some journalists are very good about their sources and are like historians, and some historians are like journalists and just put the story out. And of course, things are open to interpretation. We're not going to get affidavits from people saying certain things. So all you can do is present as much as you can, which is not just single source, but double sourced. But you are relying on, I would say, slightly unreliable narrators, people who may have another agenda, who you can't verify. So there's always a risk with these sort of contemporary biographies of particularly figures like the royals, who are well protected. But yeah, I mean, that's why one is careful. I mean, I would have liked more documents, for example, though documents themselves can lie. Just because something's in an FBI file doesn't mean it's true. But it would be nice if one could get more corroboration. Funny enough, what's happened since the book came out is people have come forward, and some material that I wasn't able to put in, I'm now able to put in because I have more sources, or have backed up things that I wrote about, which seem controversial. So, for example, the early age in which he became sexually active, things like that, which seem quite sort of dangerous to put in. People have come back and added some more information. So sometimes one does that. One has to float things in order to wheedle out information.
Let's start with Jeffrey Epstein, because that's very much in the news at the moment. Let's just start by discussing who he is or who he was. Tell us a bit about him as a person.
Well, Jeffrey Epstein was, I suppose, a financier who made his money, no one quite knows how, with huge sums of money, was given a huge townhouse in Manhattan by a man called Lex Wexner. Seems to have had links with the intelligence services and with Mossad. Was very close to Robert Maxwell, and then clearly to Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, subsequently. And he seems to be, just a player in Manhattan and elsewhere. Very keen to sort of build a network promoting science. He collected people, I suppose, and he used his wealth to push to basically social climb. But he is a mystery figure, because a bit like a sort of figure like Great Gatsby, because he comes from nowhere. He's a failed high school teacher who suddenly has large sums of money and is moving with the elites of the world. And then, of course, people are drawn into him. Bill Gates becomes close to him, Stephen Hawkins, and, of course, Prince Andrew. And the relationship with Prince Andrew is Prince Andrew gives him status and respectability. What Epstein gives to Andrew is someone who pays off his ex-wife's debts, someone who gives him some useful contacts too through his work as a special trade envoy, and also supplies women. And there's some suspicion that Epstein was supplying women to various people. He was blackmailing people. He was filming them in his houses, in effect in honey traps, and then forcing them to trade information with him. And that's certainly what I found with my research, that there's an awful lot of compromat that's been collected on Andrew. And part of that compromat comes from Epstein, who was trading in this information.
So when you say, you mean compromising material, that's what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay.
And it could be sexual, it could be filming of him in bed with someone, or it could be information that he's inadvertently told him, which he shouldn't have done.
But Jeffrey Epstein obviously is widely known now to have been trafficking women in some sense, supplying women for brief sexual encounters to a lot of men, maybe very senior men still around in the establishment. But he himself, and it comes through in your book, seems to have had a voracious sexual appetite. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, I mean, he seems to have needed 3 orgasms a day. He doesn't seem to have had straight sex with people. It's all about oral sex or massages. He clearly got a sort of voyeuristic thrill for seeing young girls. It's clearly a control mechanism, I think. I mean, you may be able to tell me more about this, but it seemed to me he never seems to establish any close relationship with anyone. And what was interesting is when Ghislaine Maxwell was given her testimony recently is that there wasn't really much of a sexual relationship between the two of them. And she would have liked one, and certainly a much stronger emotional relationship. And in some ways, he was very similar to Andrew, because Andrew also had a very voracious sexual appetite, inability to really sustain relationships with anyone, constant need for gratification, moving on, totally unsatisfied with anything. And again, a sort of power and control game.
But you make also allegations which have hit the headlines to do with Donald Trump's relationship with Epstein. And this is a very hot topic because many Trump supporters and Trump himself are trying to distance Trump's reputation from being too entangled with the toxic reputation of Epstein. Could you say a bit about that?
Well, Trump has sued, for example, News Corp, who the Wall Street Journal published the birthday card showing a rather sort of graphic picture. He's wanted to distance himself from Epstein and indeed from Andrew for some time, though there's plenty of photographic evidence apart from anything else of the two of them being close. And
Trump and Epstein?
Trump and Epstein, Trump and Andrew.
Okay.
And I've certainly got lots of evidence of that. Trump is also very protective of his wife Melania, and he has threatened to sue anyone who suggests, for example, that Epstein knew Melania before Trump did. And one of the claims in the book, in the first 60,000 copies of the book that went out before we were asked to change it, was that Melania actually had sex with Epstein before she met Trump. Trump doesn't like that. I mean, he's forced Michael Wolff, who's a well-known American writer, to rein back on that claim. He's attacked James Carville for saying the same. And he required my publishers to make the change in my book, though my information came not from Michael Wolff but from another source who'd also interviewed Epstein. Now, these could be boastful claims by Epstein, but according to my source, he wasn't in a boastful mood when he talked about this. It was very matter of fact. This was for a documentary. It was a serious program, and he was just telling the truth.
Let's talk about Ghislaine Maxwell. Am I pronouncing the name correctly?
I think so. I've never quite worked it out myself.
Okay, right. So she was actually girlfriend and boyfriend with Jeffrey Epstein, but you're saying that actually, although they hung out a lot together and were quite close, it wasn't a sexual relationship. But I'm not clear about that bit.
I think that it started off as a sexual relationship. I think after that she became really his sort of head sort of PA in effect, organising things. Clearly she was instrumental in trafficking some of these girls. She was the person who lured them in, and they liked her accent, the fact that she was well spoken and well educated. But I think what's also interesting is she had a relationship on and off with Andrew. I was told in 1997 about the time that Diana died, and also in 2001, and there's quite a lot of evidence of them being seen together and holding hands and stuff. But I was told that Epstein got a thrill from the fact that his girlfriend was also sleeping with his buddy. And so there's a very strange sort of dynamic there. I mean, not quite a threesome, but someone who got a thrill from almost putting out his girlfriend to his friends.
But there also seems to be an interesting pattern to a psychiatrist, this hypersexuality you're alleging in Trump, Epstein, and Andrew. It seems like almost a syndrome where a lot of senior men in politics have this voracious desire to get laid a lot. Were you struck by that?
Well, it's a new area for me. It's a new area for me. I mean, clearly with Guy Burgess, the spy, he was also very hypersexual, and blackmail was used in how he operated as an intelligence agent. But yes, I mean, I suppose it shouldn't surprise us. Rich, powerful men can afford to sleep with whoever they want to sleep, in effect. And they have presumably these drives that take them to the top in terms of their careers, and maybe are also very strong sexual drives. I don't know, but as a biographer, I've certainly noticed that. So yeah, I think they're very similar. I mean, Trump was moving in the same circles. it was a way of showing off. You know, I have a beautiful girl on my arm. I can lay anyone I want. I can get anyone I want. And you know, the fact was, I mean, he was running a model agency. Epstein was very close to Jean-Luc Brunel, who ran a model agency, and that was the person who supplied the girls. And you know, again, these were pretty vulnerable people, often who didn't speak English. They were Russian girls brought across thinking that they were going to make it in New York, and actually just being farmed out to these rich and powerful men. So in some ways it doesn't surprise me. I mean, ever since time began, you know, rich, powerful men have been able to have their choice of beautiful women.
But the role of Ghislaine Maxwell in this women trafficking thing is quite important, because we know from the history of when men do this sort of thing, they do need a woman in a way to bring about the trust in other women, if you see what I mean. So the role of a woman, you can go back to as far back as its very grim analogy or parallel with the Moors murderers.
Yep.
With Myra Hindley. She was
Yep.
crucial in luring children because she was a woman.
Yep.
So there's the role of the woman in this is really quite kind of important. In other words, it's almost as if Jeffrey Epstein may not have been able to get away with it if he didn't have this counterpart.
Absolutely.
What do you think?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, she gave respectability, she created trust. You know, women trust other women. They don't expect them to behave like this. And we've seen it with one or two other cases. I mean, think of Soham murders as well, with Maxine and Ian. So, yeah, I mean, you know, and there's an interesting trend too that Andrew was not actually someone who was very. He liked having women brought to him on a plate, which of course is what Ghislaine and Epstein did. And before that, he had a woman called Marla Lindsay who provided, in effect, girlfriends for him. And she would put on dinner parties, and pretty girls would be invited, and he would be left to sort of get on with them. And that's a pattern actually that happened with his father, who's the subject of my next book. But Prince Philip also had a voracious sexual appetite, again covered up. And you know, I was talking to someone the other day. Parties would be held in private houses. Fashion models would give a fashion parade, and then they would be expected to pair off with various people there, including Prince Philip.
So that's another astonishing allegation, which I don't think has been made before, that is in your book, that Prince Philip, the husband of the former queen, had an affair. But I think you're alleging more than one affair. But one affair in particular, you allege, is with Sarah's stepmother, I think. Could you say a bit about that?
Sarah's mother?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, my sources are good. They come from members of my own family who were very friendly with Sarah, Susan Barantis. And it was known. I mean, it was known, you know, 30 years ago. I knew this 30 years ago. I mean, there have been stories about Susan Barantis and Prince Philip that have appeared in the press. I mean, it's one of those taboo subjects you're not allowed to talk about. And perhaps now that both the Queen and Prince Philip are dead, people will. But anyone in those circles knew that there was an affair. I mean, he was supposedly seeing her actually during the fire in November 1992, which was actually their wedding anniversary. He was out in Argentina. Now, whether that relationship by that stage was platonic, I don't know. But certainly in the 60s, they were part of the same crowd. And Susan Barantis was exactly the sort of woman that Philip liked: tall, slim, aristocratic.
Let's go back to Ghislaine Maxwell, though, because, again, a lot of conspiracy theories swirling around the fact she's been moved to a nicer prison and that she's playing a role in whitewashing that whole history. So she's quite a powerful person. She has cards to play, doesn't she? That's what the theory is about what's going on at the moment.
Yes, I mean, I don't think it's conspiracy theory. I mean, I think it's pretty broad. It's pretty evident to see what's happening. I mean, Trump basically has been accused of being involved. He's looking for a way out. Ghislaine is looking for a way out of prison to a slightly cushier number and a pardon, and so she is doing the bidding. We know that Trump is in these files. We know that they've been weeded. We know from people like Pam Bondi and others. I mean, they've seen the material, and we know. I mean, I know from my own research. I mean, he's all over this story, but he clearly wants to dry clean this, to censor the whole thing, and people are going along with that, and. So is Ghislaine Maxwell. This is her get out of jail free card. So she's saying, Trump is a gentleman, he treats women beautifully, which we know is not the case. I mean, I just know from my own research, I mean, he has a very disparaging view of women. I mean, he talks about them, as objectifies them. But clearly she is going to throw out a few low-hanging fruit for the MAGA supporters who feel that there should be more openness. I don't think it'll be enough, but and she, as you say, has been moved to a much more lenient prison, not interestingly enough from Florida closer to Washington so she can testify, but actually further away to Texas. And I think what we will see is that she will disappear into the prison system. They will say, we are worried about her security, we've moved her to another prison for her own safety. No one will know where that prison is. And in fact, she's not in the prison system. She's been put on a plane to the Caribbean or wherever she's going to be sent. And she will have done her bit. She will have got Trump, he thinks, off the hook.
So what other allegations, in your opinion, given you know the story very well, is she rowing back from? What is she trying to say now that is different from what you know to be the truth?
Well, I mean, she's a proven liar. She lied all the way through her court case. I mean, I don't think you can believe anything she says. And we're going to get victims coming forward, and we've already had Virginia Giuffre's family come forward and saying this is all complete rubbish. No, she's not going to name any big names. I mean, you know, everyone expects various names, and names to be mentioned of people like Bill Clinton and Bill Gates. I don't think we're going to get any of those names. She's not going to dish the dirt on Andrew, who I think, you know, she remains very loyal to. She'll throw out a few low-level people, and that's it. She won't need to say very much. But I don't think, you know, you can go through her testimony and it's all complete rubbish. She's been interviewed by Trump's own lawyer. She kind of knows which side her bread is buttered on. So I don't think anyone serious believes. It's not conspiracy theory, it's just fact. She's been lying.
But you also allege that Ghislaine Maxwell and Andrew had an affair of some description, right? That's also in your book.
Yes. I mean, as I say, in 1997 and then again in 2001. And I mean, this is from a very close friend of hers. But you know, we have sightings of them in restaurants. They go out to things together as a date. They go into weddings together, for example. They see each other a lot in those two periods in 97 and 2001.
Let's go back to Jeffrey Epstein. You don't believe it was a suicide, because that's the official version of events, right? That he killed himself in prison.
Yes, well, I think I lay out the anomalies in the case, and people can draw their own conclusions, but people increasingly are drawing a conclusion that it wasn't suicide. And the evidence I provide is the fact the cameras were switched off at the relevant time when he committed suicide. The two guards fell asleep at the same time, strangely, and didn't mount their checks. That the person who should have been in the cell with him for suicide watch was removed. We also have all sorts of people who knew him, for example, his lawyers, who are saying this is ridiculous. He felt he was going to get out of prison. He was not the sort of person to commit suicide. This is actually how they get rid of people. There was testimony the other day from someone who was in the correctional facility saying it's impossible to commit suicide there. They don't make it easy. And then we have Michael Baden, who is the coroner, who was brought in by Mark Epstein, Epstein's brother, to do a separate autopsy. The official one hasn't been made public for some reason. The body was removed without anyone being able to look at it. They didn't go through any of the proper procedures. And Baden has said these are marks of strangulation and homicide rather than marks of suicide. So,
I mean, hanging himself. He didn't hang himself then.
He got strangled. He got strangled.
But the official version is he hung himself in the cell.
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, the evidence is that it would have been impossible with the sheets and the heights and everything else. And then, of course, we have the slight cover-up. The authorities have gone out and saying, well, we have this film of the thing and no one appeared there. And then we find that a period has been taken out of the film. The film is not actually of his doorway. There actually then is film of someone appearing in the middle of the night. Who isn't accounted for, and the suspicion is that that someone inside the correctional facility was basically asked to do this. And actually, Maxwell herself, I think, has said in her testimony that you don't need to pay people very much within these correctional facilities to kill someone. So I think there's quite a lot of evidence, and indeed I talked to one of Epstein's employees who said that he says, I mean, I didn't put this in the book, but he says that Trump was behind the murder.
Okay, so I was going to be my next question, which is who is it, and in whose interest is it to polish Jeffrey Epstein off, and you're alleging it's Donald Trump.
Well, that's what was claimed by the employee, and I don't know what evidence they have to go on that. But clearly, Trump had a motive. I mean, if he was as deeply involved in everything as everyone suspects, then the last thing he wants is Epstein testifying. And we have seen a series of people dying. A lot of the victims have committed suicide. Most recently, Virginia Giuffre. She may have been pushed to it. I mean, just through the trauma that she's gone through and just had enough. And she clearly had some problems in her own marriage. But there are suspicions with some of the other people who've killed themselves that there was a kill list. Now, I'm not going there. That is conspiracy theory. But there are questions about the number of people who've died in unexplained circumstances. So Epstein was dangerous. Ghislaine has never really spoken. The trial was very much focused on some pre-ordained sort of matters. So actually, everyone was waiting to see what she would say because she's never really been properly interviewed. The idea is that there was no one else involved in the sex trafficking. No one else benefited from it, which is ridiculous. I mean, no other names have been brought up in the trial. And I think what's happened is, there have been so many NDAs signed, deals done, sealed depositions, that, it's been very difficult for anyone to get any evidence. Epstein himself was paying off people, or people were claiming the Fifth Amendment.
So I don't quite understand this bit of the story, which is how he gets arrested in the first place, because the bit I don't understand is, according to your book and other sources, the man had homes and houses and even his own private island all around the world. So, but as I understand it, he flew back to the US and was arrested at the airport. So why did he do that? Why did he walk into the arms of the authorities?
I don't think he realised he was going to be arrested.
Okay, but wasn't that a bit foolish? This is the benefit of hindsight.
I think he thought he got away with it so far. He'd had all these lawyers who had, there were two episodes. One is the episode in 2008 with basically the sort of the deal that was done, organised by Alan Dershowitz, so that he was only involved in not sex trafficking, but I think procuring. And he did a year in an open facility. He actually went to his office each day, and he just slept there at night.
So there were two based on that, he thought, worst that can happen is that.
Exactly.
Okay.
So he knew. He knew there had been clearly articles and people were moving in, but he assumed he was fine.
Okay.
And he basically had the state authorities under his thumb.
Okay.
But this was a federal thing.
Yeah. So apologies for challenging you here a little bit.
No, it's good.
That would be one theory as to why he might kill himself, which is that he thought, hang on a second, I arrived thinking it's all going to be okay, and now I found myself in prison, and it's not going the way I thought it was going to go, and maybe he got a bit hopeless in that situation, and maybe he had an intuition that maybe he was going to end up serving a lot of prison time.
But this was the whole beginning of the whole process. So it had a long way to go.
Oh, okay.
Before he hadn't.
That's a good counter-argument.
He hadn't even been charged or anything. So this.
And he had these hotshot lawyers.
And he had, and Spencer Cooven is, a lawyer for one of the victims, is actually gone on the record saying this just wasn't the man. He knew him pretty well. This is not a guy who commits suicide.
Yes.
He's a fighter.
Yes.
So I agree. If there was no, he got charged, he was being sent down, he was going down for 20 years like Ghislaine, then possibly, but that was a long way off.
As a psychiatrist, I don't want to get involved too much in being able to speak definitively about the mental state of people who do end up killing themselves. But I would say as a psychiatrist, I have a lot of experience of that assessment. But what I would say, a couple of things, is that generally speaking, one of the things that leads people to do it is a sense of humiliation and being very worried that their reputation is tarnished forever. You just don't get the impression that Epstein's bothered about all that, right? Because he'd already been in the public eye with a lot of terrible things. So that rules out one motivation, which is, my life's over because my reputation's in ruins. I just don't get the feeling he'd have been motivated by that, because I just don't think he cared. And so there's that thing.
And also he'd gone through the thing, and he hadn't been humiliated. He still was having all sorts of people who were mating with him.
Yeah. And the other thing is that people who get depressed and suicidal and hopeless and despairing are often ruminating a lot and thinking about themselves and feeling sorry for themselves. So they're often quite sensitive, thoughtful people, if you see what I mean, introverts. You just don't get the feeling that Epstein was that kind of chap, that he was a very thoughtful person about very much at all, really,
no,
and a bit
wasn't.
Teflon, a bit oblivious.
He'd
to
come
being hurt.
through so much.
I don't know what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he'd come through so much. So, I think he was a narcissist, and he just couldn't see. And I think this is one of the problems with Andrew. He can't see anything except from his own perspective.
Yeah.
So no, I think he would have done what was in his own self-interest.
Okay.
And suicide probably isn't that.
Yeah. Okay. One final argument, though, before we move on. And speaking as a psychiatrist now, thinking about this, if he was what. There's a controversy over the diagnosis, a sex addict, right? If he had a compulsive need for sex, a bit like an alcoholic or a drug addict, being in prison would have been very difficult for him, right? So maybe I'm just clutching at straws now, I'm just thinking about this in terms of psychiatrist. Even if he knew he was going to get out, maybe he just couldn't cope day after day without getting laid because he was compulsive about it. Maybe that drove him to it. I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas.
Yeah, he had all the girls were brought to him really through Ghislaine.
Yeah.
As you say, he couldn't really pick them up himself.
Right.
And Ghislaine was off the picture and had been off the picture for a while. So in some ways, he hadn't been having girls supplied to him for a while.
Okay, good counter argument.
So I don't know. He didn't have anyone else. He did have other people. There's one called Sarah Kellen who was supposed to be doing it. So, but I'm not sure that was enough of a factor.
Yes, I agree. It's arguable. Okay, let's talk about the Prince Philip allegation. Let's talk a bit about that. You allege that this man had an affair with Sarah's mother, and you allege he had other affairs as well. Talk us through that a little bit more.
Well, I don't think, I clearly want to keep my material for my next book, but I don't think there's any doubt that Philip had lots and lots of affairs, and the Queen, it's mentioned in The Crown, for example, it's alluded to there. And there have been various books about Philip which have mentioned various names, have been thrown out. He's always denied it. His line was, my police protection officers were there, how could I? But, Andrew's police protection officers were there, and he had plenty of opportunities to do things. And quite often the protection officers are not there. So, there are various actresses, there's one called Helen Corday, who was a nightclub owner who he's supposed to have fathered 2 children with. Certainly the people I've interviewed all have stories of affairs. A lot of it was facilitated by a man called Felix Topolsky, who was an artist, and his apartment was used by Philip. So, I'm trying to get chapter and verse. And the book is not just about his love affairs, it's about his life. But I think it's pretty clear that there were rumours circulating and reports in papers. There is this big gap between the two, in effect, the royal family, between Anne in 1950 and Andrew in 1960. And he goes away on a lot of these world cruises with his equerry Mike Parker, and they're on the Razzle. It's pretty well known that his last sort of girlfriend was Penny Mountbatten. She was one of the few people invited to his funeral, and that he was living with her at Wood Farm at the end of his life. So, no one really wanted to go there because, particularly while they were alive. But I think, people are now prepared to talk about it. There's one woman who, in fact, was a mistress of Mountbatten, who I know used to see Prince Philip every Wednesday. So, there's plenty of evidence from reliable sources.
Okay, but I think underneath this, there's an idea floating around, which is that the establishment and senior newspaper editors knew it all about Prince Philip and multiple affairs, but no one wanted to spill the beans for various reasons. Well, one key reason is the status of the Queen, which is that this reverence the country has for the Queen was such that breaking a story about Philip would be seen in a way as a direct attack on the Queen, and you just can't do that. Yep. She is the national treasure above all national treasures. Is that what you're hinting at as why the story has gone unreported? There was an active collusion by the media and the establishment, really.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I've talked to lots of journalists, and they knew lots of stories, and they didn't report it for exactly that reason, to preserve the dignity of the monarchy. And that's why they're exempt, for example, from the Freedom of Information Act, why there's no parliamentary scrutiny, and why, you know, journalists keep off the subject. But I mean, there are other reasons why they keep off. So one of the things in the book is the way that the palace basically tried to dampen down the stories on Andrew and protected him. And this was partly from the Queen refusing to, when there were complaints about him, to do anything about it, through to pressure put on news organisations that if they reported something, then there would be penalties. So, for example, ABC Television had investigation into Virginia Giuffre and Andrew, and were told that if they wanted to interview members of the royal family, for example, the Prince and Princess of Wales, in future, that would be denied them if they ran this story. So it's a mixture of carrot and stick. You know, think of the number of newspaper proprietors and editors who are knighted and given honours. They're often brought into the fold. They often have connections. So, for example, Geordie Gregg, who was editor of the Mail, his sister-in-law was a lady-in-waiting to Princess Diana. And they all become friends. You know, the most generous interview with Prince Andrew, most sort of positive, was done by Geordie Gregg and Tatler. And, you know, so there's an implicit deal there. You scratch our back and we'll scratch yours. So, you know, there are a whole series of things going on. And also there are members of the royal family who are very good sources to the papers, and they will leak stories, often against other members of the royal family. And this clearly happened during the marriage of Charles and Camilla. It's one of the things that Prince Harry complains about, that he was collateral damage to protect William or to push Camilla. And I know with my principals that, you know, one of the principals there used to have a very strong relationship with a particular paper and leaked stuff, and that particular paper has not covered my book, for example. Piers Morgan is very friendly with Fergie. He has done a lot of coverage of the Epstein story, but he's done no coverage of my book. So, you know, there's a little network, and of course they try and build that network. So, for example, the press spokesman for the King is a man called Tobin Andre, who is a former Mail executive and journalist. And so they will get all their people in place in order to sort of control the narrative. And this is one of the themes of my books, that our history is being curated by rich and powerful people. And we're not getting the full story, either from records being destroyed or this sort of very cosy relationship. It's a sort of lobby system, and it's how the Royal Rota works. You know, again, what's interesting, when I have lunch with royal correspondents, they claim to know a lot of the stories that I've been writing about, but say that, you know, if they did so, they would be out of the Royal Rota and wouldn't be invited to cover events. And one or two have broken free from this. So Tom Sykes, for example, on the Daily Beast, has written a story based on his own sources about the trip that Andrew made to Thailand in 2004, when he had these 40 prostitutes on an official visit. Which I got from name sources again, not, you know, so from a journalist, from a diplomat, and actually from a member of the Thai royal family. And I don't know who his sources were, but he has the same story.
Okay, so your argument is, we go back to Prince Philip, and in a way it's an echo of a story with Andrew as well. You've got a senior member of the royal family, there's a kind of individual force field around them where they're not going to get uncovered or reported on, and they're aware of that, okay? They're a bit bored, and women throw themselves at them because of who they are, or there are other people around who will facilitate bringing women to them. They've got time on their hands, and in Prince Philip's case, I mean, Andrew's different because eventually he got divorced, but in Prince Philip's case, he's got time alone, he's time away from the Queen, enough time away from the Queen in private spaces where he can get up to no good. That's basically, roughly speaking, the argument. So it's almost, you're almost saying that it would be slightly surprising if they didn't get up to no good, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, this is true of aristocratic and royal marriages. You know, they have the heir and the spare, and then they go off and do their own thing. And that was clearly what Charles felt when he married Diana. You know, it's the open marriage of Mountbatten and Edwina Mountbatten, where they each had lovers and actually had a very good marriage, but they were not sexually exclusive. And that's, you know, rife in aristocratic and royal circles. So, you know, I think the deal was Andrew and Fergie had a pretty open marriage, and though it was kept very quiet, in effect, Philip was allowed to go and play away as long as he didn't scare the horses.
Okay, let's talk now about Andrew. The basic allegation is this is a man who uses his public position to line his own nest in terms of money. There's money and sex. But let's focus on the money first of all. There is the pitch at the palace thing, and there's also an official position where he's connected to the Department of Trade and Industry to promote British industry abroad. Okay, but you're basically saying that while he was on the public dime, he was having a lot of sex and also purloining money and lining his own nest. Tell us a bit about the basic allegation.
Yes, well, I mean, he was appointed, when he came, he basically got as far as he could get in the Navy, and they ran out of jobs to invent for him. So in 2001, he came out, and King Charles warned about him. He said, you know, don't give him this job, he'll abuse it, he'll just go and use it to find nice golf courses around the world. And that's exactly what he did do. I mean, there's stories of turning up in South Africa on trips organised 6 months ahead and saying, actually, it's a sunny day, I don't feel like doing this, I'm going to go and play golf. But I think he started off with the best of intentions, and he wanted to make this work, and he was sent off as a trade representative to promote British trade, to use the soft power of the royal family to open doors that perhaps politicians couldn't open. And in some areas, particularly the Middle East, he was quite effective at doing that. The problem was he wasn't properly directed, and this is one of the problems through his life. When he's focused, for example, in the Falklands War, he steps up to the plate. But most of the time, there's no proper control of him, and he goes off and does his own thing, and he's very unstructured. He needs a structure, rather like Prince Harry. And that's why the Navy was a good place for him, because there was a strong hierarchy, and there was a structure to his life and a focus. So he has this job to promote British trade. He has paid his expenses. He is criticised often for using private jets when commercial airlines are fine, or taking helicopters when he can go by car. So he proves to be very expensive. He's a guy who kind of likes the jet set life, and doesn't realise that, you know, this is taxpayers' money. But I think the problem was he then got involved with various people. Epstein was one, and another was a man called David Rowland, who basically became his unofficial business advisor. And Andrew began to shoehorn Rowland into these trips abroad, and indeed particular meetings. So ambassadors would be told, you know, I know you've done a program of people that I should meet, but these are the people I really want to meet. And he would stay in hotels rather than with the ambassador, partly because it gave him independence in terms of women brought into him, but it gave him also independence in who he saw. And he began to do his own business on the side, helping the Rowlands. So the Rowlands, for example, set up a bank in the Middle East, helped by Andrew and indeed one of his former private secretaries who had a key position there. He was used to promote, to do various businesses in China. And in return, the Havilands lent him money, which he never had to repay. They got invited to Balmoral for tea with the Queen and to weddings of his daughters. So it was a very nice, cosy relationship. They got, again, status, again, useful contacts, and they basically gave him a little cut. And in fact, he had a business with them. He had 40% of a business called, I think, Inverness Management. Inverness is his Scottish title, the Earl of Inverness. So that was one area we made money, and this was the problem when the alleged Chinese spy, Ten Bo, popped up in the immigration tribunal, that actually Ten Bo had been one of the people pushing his activities in China. This was subsequent. So basically he got sacked from that job as special trade envoy because there were so many complaints that actually he was actually counterproductive, and he was irritating business leaders rather than supporting them. And so he'd set up this thing, which actually in principle was a good idea, called Pitch at Palace. It had all the benefits of use of Buckingham Palace and James's Palace, the Queen turning up, the Grenadier Guards taking part. And the idea was to bring investors and entrepreneurs together to give them seed money to develop their inventions. Very, very good idea, and it was rolled out across the world. The problem was it was a charity, but he then set up separately something called Pitch at Palace Global, which was a business. And one of in the small print of the contracts was that 2% of the money from investors would be going to Pitch at Palace Global. So he was creaming off money. And we now know from looking at some of the accounts that that money was being, that was what he was living off in recent years. But there are also other areas which again raise concerns, and these actually came up because of court cases. One was a court case in 2022 with a man called Selman Turk, who was charged with fraud. And in the course of that case, it emerged that Turk had paid Andrew £750,000, Sarah Ferguson £250,000, and one of the daughters £25,000, money that they couldn't really account for. For example, they said it was for a birthday present, a wedding present, large sums of money for someone that they claimed they didn't know. And what was also suspicious is that Selman Turk had been a winner of one of these pitch at the palace sort of pitches as well, and they'd become very friendly with him. So again, there was another case which emerged just through a whistleblower of Andrew taking a £3.85 million bung, in effect, for introducing a Greek water company to Kazakhstan, financed by a Swiss finance house. Now, in the end, the deal never came off, but we know from the correspondence which was leaked that was his commission. And that was a suspicion. He was doing a lot of business in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, two Central Asian republics in which Britain was keen to invest, and so he spent a lot of time there, but where he got very friendly with the rulers who were despots, really. There were no human rights there, no free elections, and they were all sort of lining their own pockets, a bit like Russia, I suppose, after Glasnost. That was a concern, and the Queen was supporting him in many of these ventures. So she was entertaining these people at Windsor, they were giving her gifts. When people raised concerns, I know, for example, the intelligence services raised concerns about his activities in Kazakhstan that the Queen basically didn't want to know. And initially I thought she just put her head in the sand, she was an old lady, she didn't want to go there. But increasingly I've come to the conclusion that she actually shut down anything, and people knew there was no point following this through. Private secretaries, for example, just gave up. One of the heads of the Foreign Office talked to me and said basically they just gave up complaints because it wasn't going to go anywhere. And she, expressed her displeasure to people if they did raise these things. So one of the problems is ambassadors who did complain suddenly found that their next posting was to Nigeria, or the police protection officer who raised concerns about something found that he was no longer on the protection squad and he was back on the beat in Brixton. So there were ways of making their displeasure felt. And people learnt that it was better to keep quiet than to say anything. So Andrew knew he was protected. It would never come out. And the fact is, I've tried for 4 years through FOI requests to get access to the files on his trips as a special trade envoy, material which should be in the National Archives. He was taxpayer funded, he was a civil servant, they shouldn't be protected by any sort of royal privilege. And yet, despite hundreds of requests, they've used every exemption possible to deny me access to this material, because it would reveal some of the people he took. And what I do know from talking to the diplomats, 2 of the people he took were his own daughters. So they were actually taken on these trips with all the attendant costs of extra security. And basically built up a very nice contacts book, which they're now beginning to exploit. So only the other day we had Beatrice opening a bank in Saudi Arabia. She's now got a job with a firm which gives her, she's now moving at these very high level conferences. Now this is someone who, without her connections and contacts, would not have that job. So again, it's a sort of Nepo babe there. And Andrew's ambitions have been transferred to his daughters. He realizes his days are finished, but he can at least work on getting one of them at least as a working royal. So there's a huge PR campaign going on there, and perhaps making a bit of money on the side. And what we forget is just the amount of money that is spent on lawyers and on PR people by the Yorks. We have this idea that they go off and do good deeds and that's it. But there's a huge operation going on to present them in the best possible light, and actually to threaten people who don't toe the line. So everyone signs NDAs, not just their staff, but anyone who has any dealings with them. threats were made to me and my publisher before the book came out, that my social media would be monitored, that they would be coming down on me like a house of bricks if there was anything there they didn't like in the book. Now, this is not the mark. This is the mark of a sort of mafia family. It's not the mark of what you expect the royal family to behave.
You said complaints. Complaints were suppressed, or people discovered if they made a complaint that it wouldn't end well for them. Complaints about what, though? Because we're discussing the money, and we're going to get onto the sex.
Yep.
Are you saying the complaints were that Andrew wasn't doing his job properly,
Yep.
or he was lining his own pockets? Is that what you're saying?
No,
the complaints
well,
were?
the complaints were mainly about not doing his job properly as
Okay.
a special trade envoy, but there were also complaints about lining his own pockets. So,
Okay.
this, for example, this intelligence officers reporting to the Queen's private secretary was about a $5 million commission in a suitcase that they had seen in Kazakhstan. That was their contact was the courier. So that was about taking a bung. A lot of it was and people wrote letters. For example, the ambassador in Tunisia wrote a letter to the Telegraph about it, and the stories began to appear in the press from diplomats complaining about facts. And then clearly I write about it in the book. I interviewed a number of people on the record who talked about the fact that actually he was counterproductive, and they didn't really know what he was doing. Andrew didn't know what he was doing really. The Foreign Office didn't really, or Department of Trade didn't really understand why he was being sent off, and certainly the ambassadors felt that he would just turn up. In New York, for example, the consulate, he wasn't even tasked. He would just turn up with Fergie in tow, and they would have to try and find something for him to do, try and find her a place at the dinner, and all they were doing was going around collecting business cards for them to do their own business.
Okay, so let's talk about the sex bit then, because again, the allegation in the book is he has a voracious sexual appetite, and part of the connection with Epstein is a constant supply of women. And you mentioned this famous trip, notorious trip now, I think it was to Thailand.
Yep.
So talk to us about the Thailand trip, and talk to us a bit more about the sex problem, as it were.
Well, the Thailand trip was when he was asked to go to the celebrations for the King of Thailand in 2004. So he in fact had several trips to Thailand, both official and unofficial. Thailand was his playground, basically. He had a very good friend who had a house there. Thailand, as you know, is a place where anything goes. No one knew him. It's a very tight society, so stories wouldn't have got out. And on this trip, according to Andrew McGregor Marshall, who was the Reuters correspondent, who talked to a lot of hotel staff as part of his job, Andrew went to the best-known hotel there. He insisted on staying there rather than the residence. He liked the nightclub. That's where he picked up a lot of the girls. And in this 4-day trip, he had 40 prostitutes brought to him, which people marveled at because he was also doing official duties. And almost as soon as one was dispatched, another one would arrive. And he was swapping them with an Arab prince who was also in the hotel. He was recommending, I think you'll like this one, she's to your taste. And that was confirmed by Ian Proud, who was a diplomat in the embassy, and also by a woman who was part of the Thai royal circles. And in fact, I then got a story from her. Her driver was very friendly with Andrew's driver and has stories of young, rather effeminate men being taken to some of the parties and taken to Andrew's room. Now, I don't think that's an indication of bisexuality. I think it was just to sort of make the party go with a swing. But there have been rumours about Andrew's bisexuality. It's always, from my experience, second-hand. I haven't, so I didn't put any of that in the book. But whenever I go and give talks, there are always people with stories about that. So, that may again, play into this, voracious sexual appetite. But there were other places he went. There's a story in Kazakhstan of him going into nightclubs, going into the VIP room, girls being brought to him there, including a famous Russian pop group. I talked to a Kazakhstan businessman who said that it was standard practice for any businessman going to Kazakhstan to have women provided for him, rather like Russia in the old days, in a honey trap, and then people clearly being presented with the pictures and it being used to blackmail them. So there must be, I think, a lot, I'm told there's a lot of compromising material. And again, there's a man called Tim Riley, who worked for Kroll, who's now Don at Cambridge, who talks about compromising material that the Russians have. And my sources talk about material with Mossad, with Libya, with Middle Eastern governments, with China, and clearly with Epstein. We know Epstein was recording people. A woman called Juliet Bryant went into the control room and saw them. We know the FBI picked up tapes when they made their raid, they found all the things. I mean, they'd been a tip-off and they'd gone. But I understand that the Palm Beach police did pick up some tapes in 2006. They remain closed. They haven't been made available. I know that the chief of police there was worried that these tapes might disappear, and he gave them to a colleague. And one of these men who died mysteriously young in rather suspicious circumstances, but he gave them to someone else called Mark Dugan. And Mark Dugan then took them to Russia, and then, for whatever reason, seems to have got into bed with one of Putin's right-hand men. And so the assumption is that this stuff is now with Putin as well. So there's an awful lot of stuff out there which is, I think, pretty compromising on Andrew. I have another case with a Russian spy and a red-haired spy, a sort of swallow, it's called, seducing him in a hotel in Knightsbridge, giving him a Mac which was bugged, giving him some money, ostensibly to pay for a holiday for his daughter in Switzerland. And there's also an awful lot, particularly in the Middle East, the way they operate, and this is particularly true of, for example, King Juan Carlos of Spain, who was a sort of buddy of Andrew. I mean, his two sort of partners in crime were Mark Thatcher, very similar situation with Margaret Thatcher, a very indulgent mother, reputation for being, putting this, the state above the interests of her son, and actually now emerging was kind of working with her son. So Mark Thatcher was one, and King Juan Carlos was another. And I talked to King Juan Carlos's mistress, and she says that he would be often paid in jewellery. And that's certainly what's happened with the Yorks. They receive a lot of jewellery. I mean, for example, one of their business contacts gave Beatrice on her 18th birthday an £18,000 necklace. And one of the interesting connections, I'm told, is that these royals had very good connections with jewellers. And what's happened is they pass the jewels across to the jewellers sort of adapt them a bit, remove some of the stones, and then this stuff is put out in the market. So that it's a way of fencing stuff. Clearly Juan Carlos was laundering a lot of money because, again, he didn't have any scrutiny. So if you want to launder money, the best person to do it through is a royal.
So now, as you're talking, I'm beginning to see why there might be a motivation for Andrew to travel the world, hence the Department of Trade and Industry thing,
perfect
right?
for him.
Yeah, so you travel the world because you get access to lots of women, whereas back home that might be slightly more problematic.
With no scrutiny. With no scrutiny. You also get access to golf courses.
Yeah.
You're working with people, like the Middle East, who kind of operate in the same level.
Yeah.
Same level of corruption.
Okay.
And you have status, which is so important to him. I mean, because he has no sense of his own identity.
Okay.
It's what's not to like.
Okay, but he's not been travelling the world for quite a long time now. So how does this all work when he's at home, in terms of the sexual aspect?
He has masseurs brought in to him at Royal Lodge. The term is to help him heal. He likes to have these massages to the sound of country music. His thing is what's called four-handed massages, where two people massage you at the same time for the sort of all-over body experience. So, he's nothing really has changed. The women are there on tap for him. He's able to conduct his business. Kind of without scrutiny now, because everyone kind of supposedly forgotten about him. I think he does travel. I talked to a woman called Denise Martel, who claims to have lived in Royal Lodge with him for 5 years. Now, no one has ever mentioned her. And so there must be a way of her getting in and out. And there are lots of stories of him literally, a staff car drives out and he's on the floor of the car under a rug. So plenty of opportunities for him to go and travel abroad still.
Okay. So we've talked about Andrew. What about Sarah? Talk to me about that, because you're also making very similar allegations to do with sex and money. Let's talk about the sex bit first with Sarah. Tell us a bit about the allegations you're making.
Well, Sarah was known as a good time girl when she was a chalet girl in Verbier. This is where she got the taste of the high life. She was the live-in girlfriend of a man called Paddy McNally, who was a sort of multi-millionaire who made his money in motorsports. And she was with a very fast set, many of whom were later convicted of drug offences. There were great worries when she was got engaged to Andrew about her background. There were a lot of stories I couldn't put in for legal reasons about her activities. There was an attempt to kind of hoover up, for example, photographs that had been taken of her. There were some nude photographs, things like that, to make sure that nothing embarrassing could come out. And what's interesting is that they didn't say you better not marry her. They put him off marrying Cousteau because she'd appeared nude in a film, but they didn't seem to be too worried about Fergie. So there was this reputation behind her. I do talk about them both having affairs throughout their marriages from quite early on. They're well documented, some of her affairs. So first of all with a man called Steve Wyatt, and then with a man called John Bryan, and then all part of the same group of so-called financial advisors, and a man called Alan Starkey. But she also has these obsessions with people. So she had an obsession with Tiger Woods and chased him across America. She had an obsession with an Australian tennis player called Thomas Muster, who she went to Australia to see. She's denied it, but I actually have people who actually saw her walking into his room hand in hand.
Thomas Muster, you mean?
Yes,
okay.
Into Thomas Muster's suite. So this is the thing, there are always denials, but I have people who could, if necessary, give affidavits on this. Mm-hmm. She got obsessed with John F. Kennedy Jr. And wanted to have dinner with him. He kind of realized that she was a little kooky. She had an obsession with Kevin Costner, for example. She's a woman looking for love, and she admits that. And I think one of the interesting things about her is she has these very strong sense of abandonment. Her mother basically left her to go off with an Argentinian polo player when she was 13. Rather like Diana, the mother didn't get custody, so she didn't really have a mother there. She just was brought up by a father. Again, the search for the older father figure, which has been something of her life as well. But she wants to, as she says, I'm a people pleaser, and she's very generous. She wants to be liked. She wants to get, earn this love from people. So that's where the extravagance and the spending comes from. And I think where these relationships, these slightly weird relationships take place. So there is an element of sex there. She would get sexually drawn, I have to be careful here for legal reasons, but she would be sexually drawn to a lot of her business mentors, for example. But also she's very greedy, and she wants, again, like Andrew, to live the jet set life, and she could see that she could achieve this through monetizing her position as Duchess of York, particularly in the States. So, she endorses various brands on shopping channels. She gives speeches at huge fees. She endorsed Weight Watchers and was their representative very successfully, and also for Wedgwood China. And of course, for these people, it's very good. You've got a member of the royal family who is lending some sort of kudos to your product, and she's a very engaging character, and was very successful. But she would put herself out to the highest bidder. So there's an episode where she basically is paid to attend the Vienna State Opera Ball with a shopping mall magnate. She opens the shopping mall for him, turns up at the ball. She endorses. I think they've got pillows with the picture of the Duchess on it, saying "You too can sleep with the Duchess." Pretty tacky things, but anything just to make a quick buck. And this, in my view, should be controlled. She shouldn't be able to do this. And taking lots of freebie holidays. Constantly being upgraded. And I think one of the most concerning areas, which I had to be careful about, is the mixing of her business activities and her charitable work. And sometimes it was not always clear where the two ran into each other. So she was running charities, which were also her businesses. There were lots of claims of money going to charities, which when you contacted the charity, they said they'd never received. You've got cases of her charging such huge expenses for doing something for a charity that there's no money then at the end of it for the charity. Or occasions where she does something for charity doesn't charge, everyone thinks how wonderful, but then has an exclusive relationship, forbids him from taking pictures, and has an exclusive relationship with Hello magazine, who pay her for an interview and pictures, and she makes money out of this. And it's all about burnishing her credentials as this charity person, humanitarian, or lovely person, great for her social climbing, but you've got to ask, what was the motivation behind it?
I understand the allegation you're making, that this notion that she does charity work and then actually the money disappears into her pocket is an allegation I understand that is concerning. I don't quite understand, unlike Andrew, what the allegation is about her lining her own pocket. I mean, she needs to make a living. Are you saying she is exploiting the HRH link?
Yes.
To commercially, and
yes.
therefore she's demeaning the brand?
Exactly. Well, she's removing. I mean, we were there about protecting the dignity of the monarchy. Well, this, promoting cranberry juice or blenders, or having a Duchess collection or whatever, doesn't in some ways. It's just discourteous, really. To the royal family are not meant to make money off the back of their position. If it was Mrs. Sarah Ferguson doing this, then that'd be one thing. But everything has the Duchess HRH on it. She's not meant to use the term HRH. I mean, we're criticising Meghan Markle for doing very similar things, but she's been doing it for years, and no one seems to have said anything. There are members of the royal family who make a living, and they make an honest living. So Lord Lindley, for example, is chairman of Christie's. He's a woodworker, makes furniture, but no one is suggesting that he's monetised his position in the royal family. Lady Sarah Chatto is an artist, but her work isn't sold on the back of being a royal. So I think there are ways of doing it. And there should be control. I mean, the fact is, if it was Sarah Ferguson, no one would be interested in her, full stop. It's because people feel they have this touch of royalty there, and more fool them, I would say. But the fact is, they should be protecting their reputation. And if she really cared about the reputation of the royal family, rather than just making money herself, then she wouldn't be doing this.
So the press have picked up on many of these allegations that you've made that are astounding, but I think there's a deeper, more provocative challenge your book makes, which I think the press have not picked up on, and I don't want to tackle some of them now. One is, the Queen, the late Queen, is a national treasure beyond all national treasures, as far as the UK mindset is concerned. But really, one of your fundamental allegations, I think, is that the Queen is in a way at the heart of the cause of all this. She protected Andrew, she gave him money, and she spoiled him as a young person. So really what I think you're alleging is the Queen has really quite a dark side to her, in the sense that she created a lot of this problems. She created a monster. She overindulged him, she protected him, and as a result, she's kind of responsible. I believe that is one of the fundamental allegations you're making. And I think people are fighting shy of confronting that point.
Absolutely. You're very astute. You were saying it. Absolutely. I mean, I even have a caption to one of the pictures. I think it's the last picture. And I say, this picture of the two of them together, the Queen and Andrew. And I say every time, there was some new scandal, she gave him another honour, made him Vice Admiral, or made him an Order of Knight of the Garter. So you're absolutely right. People don't want to go there. In fact, I got warnings from another royal writer with close connections to the palace saying, we don't mind you putting the boot into Andrew, but don't touch the Queen. But I have touched the Queen, and I think that's absolutely right. And I think we do need to address this. The wheels are slightly coming off the whole thing. People have talked. I mean, Rob Jobson in his review for the Standard talks about the reputational damage to the monarchy by this book, and that they need to do something. So you're right. People are focused on the sex allegations more than the financial ones, unfortunately. And I think they focused on Andrew as opposed to the wider problem, which is they know they're protected. We need more accountability and more transparency. So I talk about the need for a royal register, which was talked about 20 years ago. The fact that they should have removed from them the FOI exemptions under the Act. That there should be parliamentary scrutiny. Not allowed to ask questions. The office in the House of Commons or the House of Lords will forbid parliamentarians from asking questions about the royals. Now, this is again to protect the dignity of the monarchy. But as Norman Baker says, the monarchy is protected by behaving well, not by being protected.
I want to come back to another, I think, darker and more serious allegation your book makes, which I think the press have missed. But I want to, before we do that, go back to a fundamental point about Andrew and his sexual proclivity. You make an allegation that he had a very early sexual encounter when he was very young. And your allegation, again, a psychiatrist would be interested in this, is that maybe this is what has led to his voracious or strange sexual appetite. Tell us a bit about this encounter.
Well, the encounter comes, I mean, the information comes from a member of his staff who has proved reliable on everything else, which is why I felt I could put it in. I also felt I could put it in because, as you say, it does explain his behaviour. It's something I saw with Mountbatten as well. Mountbatten was abused as a young boy by the man actually who eventually married him, but a schoolmaster called Frederick Long, whose papers were completely wiped from the Mountbatten collection, apart from some love letters I found by chance in Miscellaneous, which they clearly missed. Because this was a man clearly he remained closely in touch with, the fact that he married him, 10 years later.
When you say married him, you mean oversaw the marriage ceremony?
Oversaw the marriage ceremony,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
no, they didn't have
Okay,
single-sex marriages in those days, but yes, he was the vicar who married him.
Okay.
But I did think it was important. I did also picked up stories talking to Heather Down, who's prep school contemporary, saying that there had been talk of sexual activities with one of the female members of staff. Now, that could have been, again, boastfulness. I mean, we had nothing to prove it. But it's, again, one of those occasions where I thought, it's as it's proved, people did feel there might be something here that might explain his behaviour. I mean, it's very hard to prove or disprove in some ways. But I'm hoping that maybe some people will come forward and maybe that will shed some light on it. But, he was quite physically mature as a young boy. He was quite large. He's always been very confident. And, there are stories of boys having sexual experiences at that sort of age. I mean, what was bizarre about it is that he was taken to a brothel with another boy by the other boy's father. But that does happen. I mean, it does happen in those sort of circles. But it tends to happen a bit later, 17, 18, I'd say. So, again, if that contemporary was to come forward, that would be interesting. But, these things, are not unknown. So I felt it was safe to put it in because I knew I would be attacked for it and people would say, well, this is just salacious gossip. You haven't got any proof. And this is a case where I'm reliant on my source, who on everything else has proved to be absolutely accurate and verifiable.
But the allegation is that he was taken to a brothel at about the age of 11, is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
By who, again?
The father of a friend of his.
At school?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, and you believe that could have been a formative...
Well, I think so. I mean, I think it would be formative with anyone. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Okay.
And the line was that he in fact, I mean, he was known as Randy Andy at school. I mean, he clearly had no difficulty getting girls. I mean, he was a good-looking guy. He was very confident. I'd be interested in your take on it. I mean, does this sound possible, and does it kind of explain a lot?
Well, I'm glad you've asked me the question because I think
I should be interviewing you. You're the one with the answers.
I think a lot of the book raises some very interesting psychological questions because really what the book is about strange behaviour, I would say.
Yeah,
right?
They're both very odd.
Right. And I think that is psychiatric territory, which is why do people behave this way? I would argue that you've come up with a kind of theory that's in the title of the book. You're kind of saying these people are entitled. They have a strong sense of entitlement, and that leads them to behave in a way that's very unhelpful to them and other people. Yeah. So I believe you have a sense of an implicit psychological theory, right? And I think the other thing that's interesting about this is it's a recurring problem. Unless the royal family address this issue, it's going to be a generational problem, okay? And the future generations, and maybe we're already beginning to see it with photographs of the newest royals in the papers. What happens when someone is born into great privilege, but there's no obvious purpose to their life because someone else has got that job, okay? In Andrew's case, it's Charles, and the minute William is born, he gets pushed further and further down the line of succession, right? So what does someone with that strong sense of privilege, and they don't have to worry about rent or putting food on the table, how do they derive meaning in life? I think it's actually the fundamental question that's being posed here. Because if you don't solve that problem, and you need a senior authoritarian member of the family to be thinking about this problem and how to solve it, then you get this. You get people who indulge themselves with money and sex, because it's their replacement for a lack of meaning.
Any family firm, I suppose,
yes,
with others. It's succession or whatever, Yes,
the same problem that you could say the son of a billionaire. It's multiplied many times moreover with the royal family, though, for other reasons, to do with deference and so on.
But what I would say to you is, we have Prince Edward and Princess Anne, who have found a position as spares and a purpose, as supporting the monarchy, and Prince Philip too. I mean, the role was to walk behind the Queen and to support her. So you don't need to be the main guy. You can be there as the right-hand guy. So, I think it's character. Some people, the characters of Edward and Anne clearly are very different, and possibly even their parentage, which is another factor I don't talk about in the book.
Yes.
And that may explain why Andrew is so different.
Yes. Well, as a psychiatrist, I'm very interested in this point about character, because, of course, the ancient Greeks thought this was a central question of life, which is how to build character in people, and how do you become a virtuous person. A person who just naturally does the right thing without having constant CCTV footage to regulate you or monitor you. Yep. And I actually think this is the modern dilemma. We've gone down another route, which is monitor everyone, and that's how you keep them in line. The ancient Greeks said there's another solution. Build people of good character, and you can leave them unsupervised because they'll just naturally do the right thing. So I think it's a fundamental question about how you build character. And what we're seeing is if you create people who have no trouble in their lives in the way the rest of us have trouble or have to overcome difficulty, that we have to figure out a way of being in the world so that we give the world something, so the world will give us something back, which is like, the world will pay us. So we have to find a purpose as a result. And all of us have to solve that problem. But royals don't seem often to solve that problem.
But what I would say is he went to Gordonson, which is a slightly different school. It is all about creating, working for the community and values, not just about, passing exams. He had the example of particularly his father, but also of Charles in this. And the Queen's sense of duty. He also goes into the Navy, again, very strict discipline. About being, a naval officer must always be, polite and all sorts of things. So he had all these structures in place, but he still behaves badly. He gets worse when he leaves the Navy, because then he can do what he wants and there's no structure. But even then, he was promiscuous. He was a bully. He was had no sense. I sort of feel it. You're right. It is about searching for an identity, but a lot of people find that in the work that they do or in their own self-confidence and the qualities that they have. I think he's a rather pathetic figure. I think one of the things there is in the fact he is such a loner. He has so few friends, partly conditioned by the fact that he's segregated for various reasons, but also because he's not good at making friends. He is a sort of awkward person. And he seems to self-sabotage himself. Time and time again, he's sent off to do something, sent off to LA in 1982 to represent the Queen, and he turns a paint gun on the journalists. It's the sort of thing an 8-year-old does. And is there a sense, do you think, of both of them, that neither of them have really grown up? That they feel their happy place is when they were young and didn't have all this responsibility. Sarah, says, I'm happiest, pretending to be, 8 and talking to little kiddies. And it's a bit with him. The teddy bear thing is a bit weird, isn't it?
Talk to us about the teddy bear thing.
Well, the
audience won't be aware of what you're referring to.
Right, the teddy bear. Right, sorry. The teddy bear thing is that he has an obsession with teddy bears. Even at his wedding, there was a giant teddy bear in the sort of going away car. And journalists talk about going to interview him, and their teddy bears sitting in the sort of reception. But there are 26 teddy bears on his bed, supposedly put there every night in the right order. There's a little perspex card the maid has to go through to make sure that they're all lined up. And this is his thing. I suppose in the way some people collect stamps. But there is something weird about even having teddy bears when I think he was in the Navy. So there's a sort of, and even just the interest in porn that he has. People talk of him going to save the weekend, not turning up at at all. He just sits in his room watching porn. This is a guy who finds it very difficult to interact with people and is almost going back to the sort of this Neverland.
Yeah. Well, that's another very interesting theory, and we see echoes of that with Michael Jackson, for example.
Yeah,
the idea here is this is the people who never really grow up for various reasons, okay?
Yeah.
So they're like a child trapped in a man's body. So I understand that theory, but I still would say the tension between it is I'm saying that there's something about the environment they're born into that creates that. I think you're harking back to another famous theory in psychology, which is they're just born that way. They're born a bit weird. Because what you're saying is other members of the royal family born into similar privilege do find meaning and purpose and don't stray off the path. Now, you bring up a very good example to do with the army. Harry was in the army, right? And there's a sense in which Andrew being in the Navy, the army or the military service could provide structure and meaning, but you've got to get into it and you have to be part of it and want to be part of it. You said, and I thought it was a very funny line, a good line, that they ran out of jobs to give him, right? And the same thing with Harry. There was a sense in which I think Harry had to leave because they thought it was too dangerous for him to be in the army. And if we go back centuries, as a historian, I'm interested in this point. Why is it this overindulgence thing, which surely would have been a problem with the royal family in centuries past, maybe is more of a problem today? Because I think in the past, the royal family did have to fight wars, right? And they had to fight for their position. There was always threats from the outside. So they had a natural purpose. There was World War I, World War II, where the royal family couldn't run away from that. They had to be part of what unified the nation. And maybe the lack of a world war that we've had, or the lack of an existential threat to the nation, is part of the problem. I'm a big fan of the idea that if you're going to find meaning, the armed services are not a bad place to go. But you've got to believe in it. You can't just be forced into it. So I still think there's a problem, which is the fact that the rest of us have experienced difficulty, and that's what makes us grow up. And if you protect people I think this is one of the fundamental lessons. If you protect people from difficulty, you create a disaster. And I think one of the modern tensions in modern culture, and at school, everyone must get a prize, no one can lose at anything. We've gone to an idea which we must protect children and people from difficulty, whereas actually a certain amount of difficulty is what leads to personal growth. Yep. So although your book is about Andrew and the royal family, it's about other things. Yep. It's about modern society and establishment. But be careful about trying to copy this protection of people from difficulty in ordinary childhood, because it's actually difficulty through which produces growth and eventually happiness. There's a funny paradox. It is the overcoming of adversity that leads to happiness.
Yes,
I think.
Well, I remember when I left university, I went for a job and they said, we're not going to give you this job. You haven't struggled enough. We want someone who's really struggled. And I think that's true. I mean, what's interesting with him is, I mean, he was protected in the Navy. I mean, he was over-promoted. He was given good reports when he didn't really deserve them. And for example, he won the prize for the best pilot at one point. And I talked to the training person and he said, well, all I can say is that we would have failed him if he hadn't been Prince. And one of the, it's ridiculous. He won Best Pilot. But these were people, again, trying to curry favour and keep in with Prince Philip and other people who were kind of watching them. And so that gave him a very exalted sense of his own abilities. And he was very lazy. And he felt he could glide through because he hadn't, as you say, suffered. And I think one of the girlfriends makes the comment that she found it attractive, but I would say it's unattractive. This is a man who's never been to a supermarket. And so he has no idea of how ordinary people live or any of the pressures that they're in, or even just general life, which I find bizarre, because you can go to boarding school and you join the Navy, there must be opportunities to go to supermarkets and at least talk to people about how life is really lived.
Yeah. Is there another point, though, as a historian, I think I'm interested in your view on this. Again, back in the day, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when people had money, their main problem when they woke up in the morning was how to entertain themselves. So there was a lot of shooting and golf and throwing of parties and just inspecting the land from which you made money now and again, right? Whereas if you meet someone like that today, they seem a bit of a loser. We've got a modern idea, which is you are meant to work. You are meant to do something.
But it gives you purpose.
But back in that day, work was a sign that you weren't wealthy enough. right, was a bad sign.
Yeah.
If you were wealthy enough, of course you didn't do any work, and you found meaning in doing other things.
Yes, I know. I suppose you could do charitable work and other things. So you could, you work within the community. So you kept busy. I mean, it's a bit like being retired now.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to hint at is maybe the royal family is an anachronism now, because it belongs to a bygone era where it could work. It just can't work in the modern world today, unless they see it as something where it's a job, and like any proper job, if you don't do very well at it, you get the axe, and that can't happen. Is it an anachronism in the modern world?
Well, I mean, we have the situation where we no longer have hereditary peers, so we don't believe in the hereditary principle. So if you don't believe in that, how do you justify having a monarchy? I believe the monarchy does fulfill a very useful role, and that's why I'm keen for it to survive. I mean, people may say I'm doing my best to destroy it, but I just think it's let down by these individuals, what I call the rogue royals. But you're absolutely right. We're moving to a position where if people don't deliver, like Andrew, they're out. And marginalised, and the slimmed down monarchy is all about people having to deliver or be out, up and out, a bit like the armed forces has become. I think that you're right. The institutions are evolving. I mean, my own argument is they need to evolve a bit more, modernise a bit more, in order to survive. And instead of just sticking their head in the sand and hope the problem will go away, they need to address this. And for the sake of the individuals involved, I mean, do people want to join the royal family now? There are plenty of girls who didn't want to marry Harry because they didn't want to get into that world. And I wonder about the children of William, if they really want to get into that world. I mean, clearly, people like Zara and Peter Phillips didn't. And I suspect that the children of Prince Edward won't want to do that. They all want to do their own thing. Yes, how can the royal family survive if no one wants to be a member of it?
So, Andrew Lownie, one final question. You've written this wonderful book, very interesting book, entitled. It's about a lot more, as we've discussed, than what people may think it's about. But the famous chant at Trump election rallies was "Drain the swamp, drain the swamp." There seems to be a swamp, according to your book, here in the UK. And yet people aren't chanting, drain the swamp, right? Is that partly because of the royal family and the affection the country has for the royal family, and of course the late Queen, means they are now blind, in a way that maybe the Americans aren't, to the idea that there is a swamp and it does need draining?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's more criticism of the establishment and of power. I mean, and I think this is why we're seeing people supporting things like reform, moving away from traditional political parties. I think they want the swamp drained. They do see corruption. I think the problem is they feel frustrated because they don't. How do they deal with it? We don't have a proper whistleblowing law here. People get penalised for speaking out. So the whole thing just keeps being suppressed. And even, I've been calling for royal accountability for years, and all my books in a sense have been about it. But I'm a lone voice from my experience. I put my head above the parapet, but no one else wants to pop their head above it, until now. But what I am noticing with this book is that the comments in papers like The Times and The Telegraph, which you would think would be quite conservative with a small c, people do feel very strongly about some of the issues that were raised and do feel there needs to be change. But whether that comes, whether the media are prepared to push things, whether we'll see more books like this coming out, and whether we'll see parliamentary action, I just don't know. I mean, I work as an agent and I have a book on royal finances. Now that's been turned down by the man's regular publisher because of what he calls royal sensitivities, but are all to do with that publisher hoping still to get a knighthood.
Andrew Lownie, author of the book entitled, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
It's been a pleasure.